Parag. We spoke exactly a year ago in Singapore at the first New Economy Forum. We spoke then about the trade war. We're still talking about the trade war. And you say we'll be talking about trade between the US and China for many years to come?
Yes. And we could have been talking about it for a long time prior had we understood that we've always been in a trade war with the world, because it's not a trade war, it's a tug of war, as I've called it for a long time.
We being the United States.
We being everyone. Everyone is perpetually engaged in a tug of war to pull supply chains and value chains onshore as much as possible, to capture the maximum value of production from goods and services, to bring in the most advanced technology. Actually, it was ever thus. It's been this way for hundreds of years. This is how empires and superpowers rise, is by sort of activating industrial policy and import substitution policies, the way China has been doing. So actually, the U.S. and China and everyone else have always been in a tug of war over trade. So we will be talking about it for a long time.
But that's not what the liberal world order actually dictates, right? It's not supposed to be a zero-sum game. It's supposed to be a collaboration. That's why you have the WTO and so many different entities.
Great point. It's a very good question. But now that we're revisiting everything that has happened since China's entry into WTO, there's a realization that China's entry into that liberal world institutional sort of order was not meant from its part to sort of adapt itself to norms and regulations such as they were, but to bend them to its benefit as much as possible, while obviously claiming certain exemptions that have lasted almost up until the present. So I think we're revisiting the notion that there really is one global standard or code.
We're seeing the U.S. try to choke the life out of the WTO. Will the WTO still stand in the next few years?
Well, this is something that we could have been talking about way before this trade war broke out, because as you know, there hasn't been a new Doha sort of round that covers everything from services and agriculture and a global agreement on these critical issues like IP for many, many years, right? In the same way that there hasn't been expansion of the United Nations Security Council, right? So, we could be talking about these institutions that are no longer, I don't want to say no longer fit for purpose, because if any global multilateral organization still is absolutely vital, it is the WTO. It's the only one that has that binding dispute resolution mechanism. Look at how Boeing and Airbus, for example, are still going at it, right? And China is involved in very, high-level WTO disputes. So there is still a credibility to the WTO. It's unfortunate, obviously, that the U.S. now is taking certain moves that undermine it, and Trump is making his threats. But that's an area where you clearly see that his advisors have gotten him to back down a little bit. So I think the WTO is still going to be very important. However, it's not central in the bilateral resolution of this trade war.
You can't turn back globalization, right? And it's fine to say that each state for itself in terms of maximizing benefits from trade. But when it becomes self-destructive, as we're seeing across all of the data sets pretty much globally, who benefits from that?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important to underscore what you just said, which is that you cannot turn back globalization. There are a lot of programs and commentators who actually say we're in this phase of deep, permanent retrenchment of globalization, nearshoring of supply chains, reduction in the sort of at least a deceleration of the rate of global trade growth versus GDP growth. Those are very narrow metrics. If you want to talk about the full picture of globalization, you have to take into account global capital markets and finance. And if you think about, again, the U.S.-China relationship and just China and its capital account liberalization going on, you're talking about the Chinese asset management industry growing from the $3 trillion today to maybe $15 trillion over the next decade. A lot of foreign capital really wants to come into China and is. So when we talk about trade as if it's synonymous with all of globalization, that's a big mistake. So when you say who wins, well, there's still a huge upside to financial globalization. And what China is doing with its capital account is what, of course, Japan and Korea, very mature economies, have long since done. And after China, the more developing markets of Asia are going to want to do the same thing, India, Indonesia, and others. So there's no question that there's still a lot of globalization ahead of us. It lies in finance and technology and services, and it's definitely win-win.
And we're already seeing that one avenue of that is the RCEP, which is very China-focused, right?
Absolutely.
You have seen India opt out of it.
Yeah.
Will it still be a strong institution?
No question. So what RCEP is going to do, minus India, is to reinforce the already very intense and growing trade between China and ASEAN. As Bloomberg yourselves reported in August of this year, actually, China now trades more with ASEAN than with the United States. let's just repeat this so that everyone understands. We're talking about this U.S.-China bilateral trade volume as if it is the central axis of the world economy. Meanwhile, China trades more with ASEAN than it does with the United States. And I think that even if you have some kind of a recovery or rollback of the tariffs on both sides, the degree of suspicion is still very high, the outstanding issues are still very high, but RCEP is going to accelerate that integration. And clearly the combination of TPP, which Southeast Asian countries also joined, and RCEP means that, again, Southeast Asia becomes a very multi-directional trade player to its benefit.
Technology is a new battleground. What does that look like in the next 10, 20 years?
Great question. Again, technology is part of this tug of war. It almost, always has been. And if you talk about even solar panels,
is it the central point of this tug of war now?
Well, it would be nice if we could focus the trade war conversation on, what it's really become about. Very often it's very broad, so I'm glad that we're now going to talk specifically about it. We don't talk enough about that factor. But technology is a broad category. Again, solar panels are technology, industrial robotics are technology, clean energy, all of these things where China has been investing hundreds of billions of dollars on annual or as part of each of its 5-year industrial plans. So yes, it's going to remain very central. And the thing is that we can already know today what the critical technologies are, where the highest value added is, where the R&D money is going. And as we know, it is in AI and in semiconductors in these areas. And we know for sure that one of the consequences of this bilateral trade war has been to accelerate China's efforts to become more self-sufficient in these areas. And let's remember that China can substitute, even critical U.S. technologies, with a few exceptions, from Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, right? 3 very high-tech economies, producers of these components and goods. And that is going to further accelerate this sort of Asianization of Asian trade in the years ahead.
So you have China, that's a very centralized economy, that's the government pursuing all of these visions, whether it's in technology or trade, the economy. Who's going to win the tech war when it comes to these different dynamics of 2 very different civilizations?
We have, I think, unfortunately, arrived at a situation in the conversation where people believe that this is a new Iron Curtain or tech Cold War, and you have to pick one side or the other, whether it's Huawei or
Do you buy into that?
I don't. Right? As I say, it's an unfortunate situation that we've kind of created this binary choice. That's just simply not the way technology works. Technology diffuses. The iron law of history is technology diffusion. No one controls. There isn't a bipolar control over nuclear weapons anymore. There isn't a bipolar control over AI. Google and other companies are investing billions of dollars right now in Indian AI startups, which could wind up being rivals to Chinese and American players in terms of offering AI as a service at a lower cost without concerns over data privacy and theft. So we really have to skate to where the puck is going, as the saying goes, look ahead and see how technology diffusion is everywhere. And yes, there are countries that have more data indigenously, like China, but it doesn't mean that the capacity in terms of the software development, programming, and so forth is not itself spreading very quickly. Because we see this in the data around how this links to human brains. Right? And you can see that whether it's Chinese brains or Indian brains or American brains, they're actually globalizing through the firm level integration and cross-border investment, venture capital, M&A, and so forth. So these technologies are spreading and planting themselves just about everywhere. India just announced, in fact, again, just to take that one example, that it's going to have a universal facial recognition built into its ID system actually faster than China. Right? But the fact that it's going to do it at all underscores the fact that even a poor country with definitely, with starting from a lower base can leapfrog very quickly. So let's not paint this binary picture.
Right.
Yeah.